No, I was just going to say we could also transition to some of our national polling as we're talking about the race in a larger perspective. And I think, I mean, this is sort of an ugly average that's moving around a lot, only because we've only seen a few number of polls since South Carolina, and now we really haven't had any time to commit to conduct any national polling since Super Tuesday. But I'm just curious to see how high that Biden line is going to go as we head into the weeks that follow.
It's just sort of incredible to look at the last month there. Um, it seemed like Biden was, pulling a Rudy Giuliani, a little bit of a more pronounced Jeb Bush, um, and then something just snapped, and all of a sudden he surges back to where he was for most of 2019. Um, do you have any thoughts on what exactly happened?
Well, I think we have to take Democratic voters at their word. One thing that's been pretty consistent throughout a very up and down polling season has been the number one issue is ability to beat Donald Trump. That's what voters have said. And I think there was the original concept of Joe Biden, the well-known Democratic warrior, longtime senator, 8-year vice president. That was going to happen, and then the voters kind of saw him, and maybe he had been out of the game for a while, hadn't come across quite as well as people remembered or expected, and then there's some shopping around who can do this, and that's why you would see it was very much, again, I hate seeing everything through the GOP 2016 lens, but it was sort of like, okay, he's the flavor of the month, who can do this, who do we back? And then he had a good week. We saw debates move late votes, and he had a good week prior to South Carolina. He had a second place in Nevada. It was a distant second place. Wasn't one he, touted a lot, but it was signs of life after Iowa and New Hampshire. Then he has, by most, if not all accounts, a strong debate. And that translates into South Carolina, a state that doesn't have a lot of early voting, a handful of absentee ballots. And he, said, that's my firewall. That's where we're going to make our stand. That's where my people are, my voters. They know me. They will support me. They did, and then the floodgates opened. On Super Tuesday night, Miles Coleman of UVA Center for Politics, our partner in doing the delegate count and a longtime participant with the decision desk, tweeted out something I think was absolutely true on Super Tuesday. He said, political scientists will be looking at the last 5 days of this campaign for years because we've just never seen it. But that's what I think happened. Is they saw, okay, Joe Biden comforted them and said, I can do this. And they ran to him.
Now, what about the other side of this? So we're talking about how essentially how the Biden has been the comeback kid in this version of the story. But going a week and a half ago, we were saying it was really Bernie's race to lose. Did Bernie blow it? I mean, it could be debate performances, could be on-the-ground campaign blunders, mistakes that he was making. But I wonder, and this is really an open question for everybody, I think some members of the Twitterati have pointed to his comments on Cuba and really doubling down, not only in the 60 Minutes interview, but then also again at the Democratic debate. The comments about, Cuba had good literacy programs and kind of pointing to some of the positives. Some people were pointing to that maybe as really the moment where he kind of blew his lead. And so I'm wondering whether or not I'm reading too much into that moment or whether or not we think that might be somewhat of a plausible piece where his campaign started to break down.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the sort of general consensus at the time was that he was essentially screwing himself over in Florida, both in the primary and the general. He was screwing over congressional candidates in Florida, Democratic congressional candidates in Florida with those comments, because if he was going to be the nominee and they would have to run on the same ticket as him, that they would not be having a good time. But that the impact nationally would be, little to none outside of Florida. At the very minimum, it coincides with his decline, and it is a decline. You can see on the graph yes, Biden is absolutely skyrocketing. Um, the Bloomberg campaign said that sometimes the polls that they were conducting internally, 12-hour poll from 12 hours ago, was already outdated. But you can see that Bernie is declining, and him not being able to pull off Minnesota, him not being able to pull off Massachusetts, Minnesota, where Klobuchar was no longer in the race, Massachusetts, where he was leading Warren for the most part in the polls in the last 2 weeks beforehand. That and you see in this graph that there is a bit of a decline there nationally too. It coincides with that. May not be the substance of his comments. It may just be the negative press associated with it, and sort of folks saying that it was going to screw them over in the general, and maybe some Democratic primary voters are thinking, do we really want to? I don't really care about Cuba, but do we really want to nominate this guy who supposedly is throwing away Florida and Pennsylvania with the fracking stuff?
One other thought would be Bernie was always a candidate, or is a candidate, that people thought had a ceiling. Now, there was an argument that maybe he didn't because he was well liked across whatever cohort you wanted to look at. He thought, well, people sort of liked him, and it was fine, and they could, he might be, again, trying not to go back to 2016, but Trump was thought to have a ceiling, and then it turned out he didn't, and he just kept moving the ceiling up. And Bernie was sort of in that category. I do agree that there's a possibility of the Cuba remarks and the reality of running with Bernie at the head of the ticket. Certainly a lot of prominent Democrats were talking about it. The other part that I would thought was something that was probably out of his control was the crashing of Bloomberg between the two debates in Las Vegas and South Carolina. Bloomberg and Biden were always linked together, so that as one rose, the other fell. And as Bloomberg fell, Biden went up. Bernie really needed to have a more fractured field longer before people then could have, say, okay, we can deal with this guy. We have some basic agreements. We're going to have to live with some of the other things. Maybe we don't. But Bloomberg's falling, through the floor, I think is probably what hurt Bernie, and probably something he had zero control over. Elizabeth Warren had quite a bit more control over that than Bernie Sanders did.
Yeah. I mean, look, we don't want to take too much away from Biden and his campaign. They're obviously working hard. I question the validity of the 4-5-2-1-1-1-1-1-1 strategy. It seems to be working, but I think it has just as much to do with the other candidates. I think if Biden could have been given 4 wishes a week ago, right? Clyburn endorsement would be one of them. Pete and Klobuchar dropping out would be another one. Bloomberg, sort of being murdered on stage by Warren would definitely be one. And then I'll pull a Rick Perry and just not give you the last one. But yeah, everything sort of fell into place perfectly for him. And he's capitalizing.
And that's the nature of campaigns. There's always going to be events, and there's going to be an environment, and all you can do as a candidate is be prepared to maximize your chances. And the Biden campaign certainly